My name's Nicole Murphy. I'm a composer and I also do work in education. So I teach at the Queensland Conservatorium. I'm composer in residence at the Academy for Creative Industries based at QUT. And I do a lot of work in regional Queensland with Musica Viva, so working in communities that don't have much access to music education. Music for me as a child was always a way, writing music was always a way just to express myself or make sense of the world around me or reflect on things that I found interesting, much in the way that writing a diary is. And so it was always something that I just felt compelled to do as a personal way of sorting out the world. When I was about, I think 6 or 7, I started learning the piano, and at that stage I didn't know that composing and performing were two distinct tasks. So I think it's common with many composers that you start playing and then you just feel this need to create. So I think I started just by precociously changing the endings of phrases, and obviously because I thought, well, I can do better than Mozart or whatever I was playing. And I think sometimes it was just laziness. I didn't want to learn a particular passage, so I thought, well, I'll just make up a variation on that. When I was learning as a child, I did the Amy B sort of piano thing that most people do, and my mum had come through that system, and so she was used to hearing the same 5 pieces being thrashed to death at the when I was practicing. And I remember one day I'd been playing something that I was creating or had come up with, and she said, "Oh, what's that?" because she knew it wasn't one of my pieces. And I said, "Oh, nothing," sort of brushed it off. And then eventually she badgered me enough that I said, "Oh, it's this piece I wrote." And I was notating everything. I don't know why, but very meticulous notation, very neat, much neater than how I write, by hand now. And she took it to my piano teacher and showed her and said, "Oh, look what Nicole's done." And my teacher took it and photocopied it and gave it out to her students. And I was actually really horrified because it was just this thing I did for myself. It wasn't, supposed to be something for anyone else. That was sort of the moment that I found out that there was that distinction between composer and performer. And then when I was in high school, I had a workshop with my school choir with Sarah Hopkins, and it was the first time that I realised that there was a living composer who was from my local area, who was female, who, came in and said, "I'm a composer, this is my piece." And so that's when I realised, oh, that's actually a career path that you can do. The music that I think really sparked my interest when I was sort of in those early teenage stages was when I first was exposed to the music of the early 20th century composers. And that was the time when, whilst I'd loved playing all of the music prior to that, it felt a bit to me, playing Beethoven to me felt like going to a museum. I was fascinated and I loved it and I enjoyed it, but I didn't feel a sense of connection. And so moving forward, not that I lived at any time near the start of the 20th century, but the idea of hearing music that was closer to my time and place was really interesting to me, and I felt a very deep connection. And then, sort of moving forward a few years, learning about the music of Australian composers, all of a sudden I was like, well, this is where I come from, this is the music of my time and place, and that's really interesting to me. I was very taken by the music of Debussy, the kind of these long lines, the orchestration, the colours in Debussy and Ravel in particular. So from a timbral perspective, their work is really important to me. I love the vibrancy and chaos that Stravinsky can have, and I'm fascinated by the way that Stravinsky has managed to reinvent, but still remain so Stravinsky the whole time. I mean, that was just something that was very, very fascinating to me. And the idea of those works that you can listen to 100 times and still hear some new detail every time. They're just so rich in that way. So they were sort of the early composers that really sparked my interest and grabbed my attention in a way that composers prior to that hadn't. So I guess the beginnings of the evolution of my musical style, I think when I first went to the conservatorium in my undergrad, I was typical young composer where you threw all the ideas in and didn't do any development. And so each piece was just like idea, 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 and no through line. And I studied with Jared Brophy to start with, and he was an absolute master at being able to tease out those ideas and this kind of very organic development. So a piece was one idea that unfolded very gradually over time. And so I spent a lot of time writing very slow, spacious music that had that very organic sense of development, long lines, thin textures, soft, and maybe a little apologetic as well, and not very confident, I think. And eventually I I got to a stage where I remember him one lesson saying, like, you could probably add a few more notes in now. I'd sort of stretched it as far as I guess it could go. And so then I went through a period where I decided that I, wanted to, I guess I had a bit more confidence in what I was doing, and my music gradually became busier and more involved, to the point where there are sort of now these two sound worlds that coexist. One is still that spacious, slowly unfolding work, and then there's the more rhythmic, fast-paced, more chaotic kind of side of things. And I do really like that element of surprise, of having something that might start very busily and chaotically, but then kind of unfold into this kind of longer, more spacious section that you might not be expecting.